Hello, everybody. This is Sherry Rose, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I welcome you and all of the business and executive coaches who are attending today from all over the world at the World Business and Executive Coach Summit. And if you've enjoyed the summit so far, we'd like you to go to the website wbecs.com/refer and refer your colleagues and friends so they can benefit and enjoy the summit too. Now, we'll be taking questions at the end, but I'd like you to post your questions throughout, and we'll make a note of those so they can be answered. And our presenter today is Barry Posner, and I'll tell you more about him in just a moment. Today's session is called Great Leadership Makes a Great Workplace and What You Can Do to Make a Difference. So it's all about leadership. And we'll look at the data from over 1 million constituents across the globe and across all industries and positions to understand what makes people engaged in their workplaces. The short answer is how their leaders actually behave. And we'll examine the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, drawing upon both case studies and more empirical findings. With each leadership practice, we'll point out several key actions that people need to take if they are to lead others to greatness. And these actions can be put into practice right away. And remember, to get the most out of this session, you should be listening for these actions that you want to take as a result of being here today. And you probably want to take at least 3 actions within 24 hours to get the most out of it. And we will also be running a few polls, so there will be participation in this particular session. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Barry Posner. He is known as the most trusted source for leadership development. He is the Alcolti Endowed Professor of Leadership at the Levy School of Business at Santa Clara University. He's been named one of the nation's top management and leadership educators by the International Management Council and is recognized as one of the top 50 leadership coaches in America. As well, he's ranked among the most influential HR human resource thinkers in the world by HR Magazine. He is the co-authored an award-winning and best-selling leadership book called The Leadership Challenge, and there are over 2 million copies out there. Fast Company magazine ranked it among the top dozen books of 2012, and it's been listed among the top 100 business books of all time. So this is going to be an incredible session, and now I will hand it over to Barry.
Well, Sherry, thank you, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening. And I'm delighted to spend some time with you over the next hour to share with you some thoughts about how leadership makes a difference. And as Sherry said, I want to try and cover a bunch of material, and both conceptual material, some empirical material, but mostly some practical material about how we help others to be better leaders. And as a result of that, how we create organizations that do a better job. And I'll have some time available for questions at the end of this, but let me go ahead and just remind us that leadership is a global challenge. It doesn't make a difference where you are in the world. One of the most critical people issue is developing our leaders currently and the leaders of the future. Now, I'm going to do 3 things as I kind of rush through covering several days' worth of material in the next hour or so. I want to document with you that leadership makes a difference, share with you the data that perhaps may just be a blinding flash of the obvious, but I want to share with you some data that shows you just how important leadership is and why we ought to be spending our time as coaches helping to make sure that people can become the best leaders that they can be. I want to describe the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. I want to tell you what the research suggests that people are doing when they're at their personal best as leaders. And I want to provide some practical applications for each of those 5 practices about how you can help people to become better leaders and to engage in these 5 practices. Now, my colleague Jim Kouzes and I have been collecting data for more than 30 years. We've talked to thousands of people about their personal best leadership experiences. And the survey responses come from more than 5 million people around the world. Lots of people around the world have used this framework in their own studies of in healthcare, in the public sector, in the private sector, in all kinds of different functions. And you'll find that the framework has been subject to rigorous testing of its reliability and validity. But as I mentioned to you, our basic premise has been for more than 30 years to just simply ask people to tell us about a time that they were at their personal best as a leader. In fact, even on a one-on-one coaching basis, I oftentimes ask people to think about that time and to think about that experience and what they were doing, and draw upon that experience to ask about the lessons learned and what they can do with those lessons into today. You know, when we ask people to tell us about the times that they've been at their personal best, I can tell you in a larger group setting, I can tell you two things. One is that everybody has a story to tell, and I can tell you that the stories that they tell, the actions that they talk about, are more similar than they are different. It doesn't make a difference whether the story they recall was 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago. It doesn't make a difference whether they were in the public sector or the private sector, whether the experience took a week, a month, several months, several years. Everybody's got a story to tell, and the stories they tell are more similar than they are different. And you might just be smacked on the side of the head just with these two facts and ask yourself, so what do these things tell us? What do these two facts tell us? Well, what they tell us is that leadership is, in fact, something that every single person is capable of. We believe, in fact, that leadership, as you look it up in the dictionary, is not capitalized. It's not a position or a place in the organization, but it's an attitude. It's a sense of responsibility. And in high-performing organizations, everybody needs to act as if they're a leader. This meta fact also tells us that we can actually understand and observe, and we actually do know what leadership looks like. In fact, we suggest that when people are at their personal best, they're engaged in these 5 practices, and I'm going to, in a few moments, tell you a little bit more about each of these practices, a couple stories, some data, and some practical applications. But let me begin, as Sherry said, with a poll. And here's the first one. I want you to think about the extent, kind of the percentage. What percentage do you think the 5 practices of exemplary leadership would explain when it comes to how engaged constituents are in the workplace? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask in our studies, we're going to ask people to describe the 5 practices of exemplary leadership of their supervisor, and then we're going to ask them 10 questions about how engaged they are in their workplace. And what we want to do is we want to try and explain, well, what explains why people are engaged or not engaged. And so the first poll asks you to take, gives you a choice of 1 to 5%, 6 to 15, 16 to 25, 26 to 35, or 36 to 45. What percentage do you think leadership accounts for when we ask the question, why are you engaged or not engaged in the workplace?
So I'll give everybody just another moment.
Choose one of these, and then we'll take a look and see.
Okay, just another moment. Everybody, please place your vote. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And let's have a look at what the results are. Okay, can everybody see those results? Barry, can you see the results?
I can't.
Okay, so we have the greatest amount people have said, 67% said it was 36 to 45, 17% said it was 26 to 35, 10% said it was 60 to 25, 3% said it was 6 to 15, and 1% said it was 1 to 5.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you very much. You're very good test takers. You know, I wouldn't ask this question unless it was going to be one of these high answers. And let me tell you that you're absolutely right, that the more the constituents report their leaders use these practices, the more they are engaged in the workplace. And in fact, it doesn't make a difference where you are in the world, whether we ask people in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, South America, or the United States. We explain anywhere between, as you can see, anywhere between about 28% all the way up to over 40% of the variance in why people are engaged in the workplace. And I want to just dramatically take a moment and show you that this number is remarkable, because you might ask the second question, well, okay, Barry, so this is what leadership explains, but what about if we knew who these people are, that you know who these constituents are and what it is that they do? What would happen if we knew their age or their gender, any of these questions? And all of us here could come up with hypotheses. We could somehow say, well, take age. We could say, well, young people would be different. The millennial generation would be different than baby boomers. Or some of us might say that men might be different than women. Some of us might say that people in marketing would be different than people in HR or accounting. Some of us might say that people in number 7, organizational size, small company leadership would be different than large companies. Some people might say, well, the time you have with your company might make a difference in how engaged you are. So here's a second quick poll that we might ask. If we knew who these constituents were and what they do, we could explain how much more about why they're engaged or not in the workplace. So how much more would we explain? Would we explain, nothing? Would we explain 1 to 5%, 6 to 10%, 11 to 20%, or 21 to 30% more if we knew these 10 things about the people who were telling us about their engagement? So Sherry's opened up this poll, and let's see how well you do on this one.
Okay, everybody, we'll just give you another few moments to take your answer and vote. Everybody's putting in their answer. Looks interesting so far. Okay, just another moment. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And let's have a look at the results. So what we have here is 0%, 14% people voted on that. 1 to 5%, 19% voted on that. 6 to 10%, 24% people voted on that. 11 to 20%, 8% of the people voted on that, and the highest is 21 to 30%, 35% of the people voted on that. So thanks everybody for participating.
All right, thank you for that, and I'll have one more poll toward the end of this. Now, this question this one's a little bit interesting. What happens to the explanation if we knew who these constituents are and what they do? The answer is we would know 0, nothing, nada. There's various ways that you could say it. But I'm telling you, if you knew all of these things about the individuals, you would be able to explain next to nothing. If you asked, how much do these things explain? They explain, well, in Europe they take all 10 of those variables and they explain less than 1%, 1/10 of 1%. In Asia, 1/10 of 1%. South America, 6/10 of 1%. It's not about your age, your gender. It's about how your leaders behave, and you can see this in this particular kind of more empirical notion. You'll see that as leaders engage more in the behaviors I'm going to describe as modeling, you'll see that the level of engagement goes up from 39.95 all the way up to 50. As constituents report their leaders inspiring, their engagement goes up. As they report their leaders challenging, enabling, encouraging, you can see dramatically differences in the extent to which they report being engaged in the workplace. And it's not just about how people feel. Richard Roy did a study in which he asked employees in 94 companies, across 94 companies. He asked a random sample of employees just to simply answer the question, how frequently did their senior executives use these 5 practices? And then he looked at the net income growth and the stock price growth of the company over a 10-year period. And, well, the results speak for themselves. As you can see, for organizations where employees felt that the senior leadership strongly practiced these, you can see a net income growth of 841% over a 10-year period versus where these were weekly practiced. You can see an organization that was at best over a 10-year period was a well-managed bankruptcy. And so these 5 practices make a difference in how people feel and how people actually then engage and produce in the workplace. So what makes a difference in levels of engagement, something that we're all trying to get people to develop workplaces where we have highly engaged people, is not ethnicity, age, gender, education, position, it's not these things. What it comes down to is it really comes down to leadership. So that's the first point. Leaders make a difference, and leadership makes a difference. So what are people doing when they're using these 5 practices? Well, I said to you that one of the things that they're doing is that they're modeling the way. If you think about your personal best leadership experience, or you talk with the person that you're coaching about his or her best leadership experience, somewhere along the way they'll talk about the importance of being clear about who they are and what they're about, and making sure that they led by example, that they set an example by aligning actions with shared values. Olivia Lay met in Hong Kong about 2 years ago, and when I asked her to talk about her personal best leadership experience, as she reflected upon it, she told me that how important it was that if she was to become a leader, she realized that she first had to define her values and her principles. And what Olivia says is kind of baseline for any of us if we're going to be successful. We need to answer the question, who am I and what am I about? In fact, when I asked Spencer Clark to come to my class last year, my leadership class at Santa Clara University, Spencer at the time was the Chief Learning Officer at Cadence Design Systems. He had previously been a president of a division of Rockwell International. He had been a general manager for General Electric, 2 MBA degrees, and I had introduced Spencer with all of these titles and accomplishments. But Spencer reminded me and reminded the audience. He said, "Thank you for that introduction." But he said to the audience, he said, "Look, if you really, all of these are just things about what I've done. If you really want to know why I've done these things, then you need to know something about who I am and what I'm about." And he then began to tell us about growing up in Kentucky, about being the oldest of 5 boys, about his parents, about some of his early experiences. And he made this comment. He said that knowing who I am has been enormously helpful then in helping guide me in making decisions about what I do and how I could do it. And that's got to be the same thing for the people that we're coaching. They've got to know who they are and what they're about so that they can use that as a compass to figure out what they should do and what they shouldn't do. Mary Godwin, in telling us about her personal best leadership experience, she said, "I realized in that experience early on that I couldn't ask anybody else to make a commitment that I was unwilling to make myself. I had to know in my heart that I was willing to make the same commitment that I was asking everybody else." And in the end, what we find is that when leaders are clear about their leadership philosophy, about who they are and what they're about, their constituents report being 40% more engaged based upon the clear. I mean, you just think about this. When your boss is clear about who he is or who she is and what they're about, then the rest of us have clarity about what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. And it's also true, as Prabha told me when I worked with an engineer in a high technology company in India. He said one of the best ways to prove something's important is by doing it yourself and setting the example. Or one of my favorite traditional Chinese sayings is simply that the lower beam will not be level if the upper one is not. So if there's something we want other people to do, we need to set the example to begin with ourselves. And I thought that this was interesting. A fellow in this picture, his name is Bob Kramer, Robert Kramer. And Kramer is a principal in elementary school here in my home area in San Jose. And he told all the kids in the elementary school that if they read 5,000 books in the fall, he'd spend the weekend up on the roof. And this is the picture of him up on the roof with his tent, a lawn chair, and some of his favorite books appeared in the San Jose Mercury News. And as one of his constituents says, I was so happy that he kept his promise. But I also appreciated and loved another comment that a young man made, Joseph Knight, age 10, who said, "It's pretty funny, but it would have been funnier if it had rained." Well, you know, no matter how hard it is that we work, there's some kid out there like Joseph Knight who thinks somehow we haven't sacrificed enough, we haven't suffered enough, we haven't put enough time and energy into it. And yet that's just a reminder that what we need to do is to make sure that we follow through on our promises, whatever they might be. And Tony Simons writes in his book, The Integrity Dividend, his research shows that firms where employees strongly believe that their managers follow through on promises, demonstrating the values that they preached, they're simply more profitable. The manager makes a difference in the example that he or she sets. And in fact, you can see it quite clearly that the most effective leaders, if I just ask the question to constituents, how effective is your leader? The simple answer to that question is highly related to the extent to which they see that leader engaging in the activities we call modeling the way. So how can you coach people to improve their ability to model the way? Well, you got to make sure that people's personal values are clear. You start with that. Start with questions about, well, what's important to you, and how do you know what's important to you, and how do you put those into action? You need to help people determine if their allocation of time is consistent with their values, and if not, to adjust accordingly. And by the way, adjust accordingly and saying, and changing this value must not be that important to you if you're not putting your time and energy into it. If as the dean at Santa Clara University, I say students are important, then I got to be spending time with students. If I say that our alumni are important, then I've got to be spending time with those constituencies. And finally, you've got to impress upon people the importance of taking promises seriously, because all of us, at least at the beginning, assume that when somebody's word is their bond. When they say they're going to do something, we take it seriously until proven otherwise. So we need to make sure that people don't take promises lightly. One of my advice is oftentimes is simply is accordingly under-promise and over-deliver. No one ever is going to be upset that you did more, that you did something better, faster, sooner, but they'll always be upset if it's the opposite way around. And modeling the way is quite illustrated in this cartoon. The boss says, well, why aren't you working? Because the employee says, I didn't see you coming. Well, it's also about inspiring a shared vision. When leaders are at their personal best, they're thinking about the future, and they're thinking about the future as an exciting and ennobling possibility of what could be. It's an ideal. And they spend time enlisting others, getting others to sign in, to buy into that vision by appealing to shared aspirations. Rajan put it this way, marketing manager at Google. He said, you know, when I was at my personal best, it was important for me to have a clear vision in my own head and be clear about why it was important. But he said that wasn't enough. I needed to be equally clear about why this mattered to others, because the truth is I can't do it by myself. Claudio Lucero, who led the first all-South American climb to the top of Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, told us that while people are not trained to face danger, in fact, they're trained to avoid it. So if you want to get someone to do something dangerous, you've got to give them a good reason to do it. And that's what leaders have to do. If you're going to ask somebody to do something they've never done before, then at some level it feels dangerous to them. And so you've got to give them a good reason to do it. And that's what inspiring the shared vision is all about. It's in some ways, it's the dilemma for each of us when we're trying to drive in the fog. When we come around that corner and we see the fog bank, most of us, if we're reasonably, psychologically healthy drivers, we're going to take our foot off the gas pedal. We're going to slow down. We're going to turn our windshield wipers on. We're going to turn the car lights on. We're going to turn the radio off. We're going to grip the wheel with both hands. We're going to maybe even lean forward as if we could see just a little bit further if we moved our bodies just a little bit further forward. But if you think about that in an organizational sense, when people are feeling like they don't know what's ahead, think about how slowly they act and think about how tense they are. And then the sun shines again, and think about how people lean back, accelerate, multitask. Well, the point is that you and I as leaders can either be the fog or we can be the sunshine. And depending upon what we are has an impact upon how fast and capable and stressful the job is for other people. And as Jim Hackett, the CEO at Steelcase, said, but that's what leadership is for. to be the sunshine, to be the fog, well, to be the sunshine, really, not to be the fog, to look at the chaos and provide a point of view about what needs to be done. Look, there's no freeway to the future, and so as leaders, we've got to be able to point a view about what needs to be done. So we might ask ourselves, well, what kind of information do people want more from their management at whatever level they are? Think about that question, and I'll tell you the answer. The answer is people want to know some variation of, well, where are we going? Where's this product, this unit, this shift, this company going? And they want to know how my job fits into the total picture. And if you can't answer these questions for yourself, let alone for anybody else, then you've just realized what psychologists would call alienation in the workplace. People are alienated, or in today's word, disengaged in the workplace, when they have a sense that they don't know where the product unit shift is going, and they have little appreciation for how what they do makes a difference. And you know, if it's true, you don't know, you think that the company is lost and what you do doesn't make a difference, then a rational person would not work as hard as he or she is capable of, would leave the job if he or she could, or would just simply retire on the job. So as Debbie Bishkaw said at IBM, she said you simply have to be able to communicate how everybody is involved and has something at stake in the outcome. And if you can do that, then once again constituents report that when it comes to how effective is their leader, their sense of how effective their leader is clearly goes up to the extent to which they see that leader engaged in inspiring a shared vision. And what you can do to coach somebody to improve their ability to inspire a shared vision, will help them make sure that they don't just simply focus on the here and now, that they've got to be able to look up and ask questions about sort of where is this taking me today? Where is this taking me today? Into what place into the future? And you've got to make sure that people spend the time and energy finding out about the dreams and aspirations of others, realizing that it's not even for Martin Luther King, who said, I have a dream. He would nearly in that same breath say, well, I have this dream, but in order for it to be achieved, this is what we will have to do. And we will have to go to jail. We will have to struggle in order to achieve this dream. And so it's not just about my dream. It is about a shared dream. It is about all of our dreams. And when we talk about inspiration, the word literally means to breathe life into. Then you've got to get people to be willing to share their excitement, their emotional excitement, because we know that emotions are contagious. And it's hard to sell anything, a product or a vision, if you're not willing to share your excitement about the purpose of what you're doing and about the higher meaning and purpose of what it is that you're doing and what's possible for you to accomplish. And leaders also challenge the process. Leadership is not about doing what you've already done. It's about doing what you've perhaps already done, but at least doing it better than you've ever done it before. And leaders do that when they seize the initiative by looking outside of themselves for innovative ways to improve, and when they're willing to experiment and take risks, because that's where they have an opportunity to learn from their experience and to generate what we call small wins. And the truth is, nothing ventured, nothing is gained. And leaders perhaps can be differentiated from managers who tend to be probability thinkers. The truth is, when we talk to people at their personal best, they always talk not about the probabilities, they always talked about the possibility. If it were already probable, somebody would have done it. Leaders did it because it was possible. Or as the Chinese again would say, there is always a higher mountain. And typically you only see that higher mountain when you get to the summit of the last one. Or as they oftentimes said at the Xerox Corporation, we're in a race in which there is no finish line. So we've got to just keep going. And what we know empirically is that constituents who feel challenged report stronger levels of engagement, and constituents who see their leaders also challenging themselves to learn new skills and abilities also experience those leaders as nearly 40% more effective than those who are not. You know, another example of setting, another illustration of setting a good example. Sam Lee, another fellow that I met in China, told me about his personal best working for a logistics company that was already quite successful. For goodness sakes, they were running products between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, 3 shifts a day, 6 days a week. So they were already pretty maxed out in terms of all that they were doing, but Sam still felt that they were making mistakes that they didn't need to make. Now, Sam was just a logistics manager. It wasn't his job. His job was to get the product from one place to the other as best and fast as he could. But he thought there were some ways that they could do things differently, and he went and talked to his manager about that, and his manager said, well, Sam, those are interesting ideas. Why don't you talk about them with some of your peers and see what you might come up with? Well, that's exactly what Sam did. And over 5 or 6 months, through some conversations with his colleagues and with management, they came up with a number of different ways that they saved the company millions of dollars. And when Sam shared with me his personal best leadership experience, one of his conclusions was that everyone, regardless of position or place, can make a difference if they dare to step out, seize the opportunity to make that difference, and take the initiative to do something about it. Claude Meyer, working for the Red Cross in Kenya, told us that in his view that leadership was simply learning by doing, and that leaders are constantly learning from their errors and failures. And the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, we all have the same 2 teachers, and their names are trial and error. And leaders, the truth is that leaders are great learners. They're open to new information, they're willing to learn about themselves, and they're willing to learn about new situations. So what can you do to coach people to improve in their ability to challenge the process? Well, one of the things to do is to encourage people to take field trips outside of their work area and discipline to see how others operate. I was working with just this last week with a group of college students, and one of the things that they said was, they needed to spend time looking at organizations like theirs on other college campuses, or organizations, student organizations, that were not the same as theirs, but other ones that they thought were successful on their own college campus, and figure out, well, what did they do and how did they do those things? So there's a lot to be learned by observing what are other people doing that's working or not working, and how can we learn from that experience. You can also help people to improve their ability to challenge the process when you get them to focus on what's next and what's new beyond just their present opportunities. Oftentimes asking somebody, look, when you're finished with this project, this program, where do you want to be? Where do you want to be? Where does your unit want to be? Where does your company want to be? And how can you make sure that as you're working today, you're working to get yourself to that future? And finally, you can help people to break their work into pieces that support progress. So put that into bite-sized pieces. I mean, Bishop Desmond Tutu about apartheid in South Africa used the analogy. He said in South Africa we talk about that you can't eat an elephant in one bite, and big projects can't be gobbled down in one thought. And so what leaders do is they break the work into pieces, and they get people to make a commitment to this piece, and the success of that leads them to the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. We also know that when leaders are seen as challenging the process, their constituents simply report that they are more effective. It's also true that leaders enable others to act. The paradox for leaders is that leaders turn their followers into leaders, because leadership is fundamentally a relationship. And what leaders do is they foster those relationships by fundamentally building trust both between themselves and their constituents, but also among their constituents. And they do that by strengthening others, by increasing their sense of self-determination, their self-confidence, their self-efficacy, and practically developing their competence so that they know how to do things, so that they can develop the confidence to be able to do that. And what we know is that when constituents feel that their leaders enable others to act, they clearly report being more engaged than when somehow they feel that their leaders aren't really concerned about making them better. The most effective leaders clearly enable others to act. Eric Ban, who is the managing director for the Certified Management Accountants organization in South China, in telling us about his personal best, told us that he said, it doesn't make a difference how capable a leader is. You won't be able to deliver without the joint efforts that come from the team. I can tell you categorically that no one has ever told us about a time that they have been at their personal best doing it all by themselves. In fact, years ago, one fellow said, look, I can't tell you about my personal best. And as I pushed him on that, he said, I can't tell you about my personal best because it wasn't me, it was us. And oftentimes, in fact, people will simply say, my personal best, well, all I did was to get other people to be able to achieve at their personal best. Cora Carmody, who's the CIO at $10 billion Jacobs Engineering, worldwide construction company headquartered in Southern California, tells us that when it comes to leadership, it's all about fostering collaboration and building spirited teams. You've got to actively involve others, create an environment of mutual trust and respect. And when you get everybody on the same page, then it's a possibility of having harmony. Anna, who at the time was with Union Bank in the Philippines, in telling us about her personal best, gave us an example of how she had to learn. She had to learn to let go. She had to learn to trust others because she was over supervising them, over managing people, and as a result, they didn't trust her because it was clear that she didn't trust them. And she learned that you had to trust others with responsibility, and when you did that, what you were doing was you were letting them know that you had confidence in their ability to achieve, and then they would set out to warrant your feelings of their achievement and their competency. Maurice Chand in Beijing told us about his personal best, and he said by including everyone in the key decisions, everyone felt like they were owners. And when everybody feels like they're an owner, when they're a leader, when they're responsible, he said it made the work of everybody just that much more easy. So what can you do to help improve the ability to enable others to act? Well, one of the things that you can do as a leader, or when you're coaching people as leaders, is to help them identify opportunities to allow others to make choices and to exercise discretion. One of the ways that we demonstrate that we trust other people is when we let them make a choice. For anybody that's listening, if you're a parent or if you had parents, that's how you develop maturity and self-confidence in youth, but that works all the way into the 80s and 90s in terms of ages. People who exercise choice get a sense of self-confidence, get a sense of being powerful because they get a chance to make a choice. It's also important, if you're going to enable others to act, that as leaders you need to learn how to listen more and talk less or tell people less. Part of what I try to do is really help leaders figure out questions to ask as opposed to telling people what to do. And so instead of telling somebody you want them to do this, what's a question that you could ask that would help them perhaps think about this issue more than they've thought about it and perhaps come to the same conclusion that you have. And finally, as a leader, if you want to improve your ability to enable others to act, then you've got to demonstrate that other people are having an impact upon your behavior. You've got to demonstrate that you actually have listened because, in fact, your decisions and your behaviors are changed as a result of what people have told you and what people have shared with you. And leaders, when they're at their personal best, they encourage the heart. They recognize at an individual level individual excellence, and they also celebrate the values and victories as a group, creating a spirit of common unity. They essentially encourage, and the root of that is, the word is courage. If you're going to ask somebody to do something they've never done before, you've got to be willing to give them the courage to be able to do something that they've never done before. Now, when Jim and I were first, talking about all these ideas some years ago, we would sometimes, at this point I might have another poll and I'd ask the question, do you need encouragement to perform at your best? And I might just simply say, how many would say yes and how many would say no? And I have to tell you, when we ask the question, do you need encouragement to perform at your best, we'd only get maybe about half the audience that would raise their hand to say, yes, I need encouragement. And we realized we perhaps weren't asking the question in the right way. Because when we asked it this way, number two, when we asked it this way, when you get encouragement, Does it help stimulate and sustain your performance? Well, I can tell you that in that same audience, nearly everybody raised their hand to this one. Everybody said yes to this one. And so now, if I could, this is just a question in logic or mathematics, because if you know that A equals B and B equals C, then A must also equal C. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that if 2 is true, when you get encouragement, it helps stimulate and sustain your performance. If number 2 is true, then number 1 must also be true. We all do need encouragement to perform at our best. We don't necessarily need the same level of encouragement, the same type of encouragement, the same frequency of encouragement. But I can tell you this, when I ask an audience, no matter where I am in the world, I ask an audience, how many of you like being taken for granted? There's not a single hand that goes up in the room. There's no one that likes to be taken for granted. And so everybody really does need, in their own way, to feel that they've been recognized and appreciated for who they are and what they do. In fact, Jane Binger, Director of Leadership Development and Organizational Effectiveness at Sutter Healthcare, puts it this way. She said, you know, when new people come to our organization, I'll oftentimes sit and chat with them and ask them about, you know, about who they are and what they're interested in. And then I say to them, well, you know, and when you do a really great job, how'd you like me to recognize that? She said most people just tell me very simple things. You know, well, just let me know. Just say thank you. Just write me a note. Just you know, send a note to my boss. She says it's just simply that people want to know that I value them. They want to know that I know that they're doing a great job. They want to know that I'm not taking their contributions for granted. It doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be new cars. It doesn't have to be a big celebration, but it does have to be something that lets people know that they're not invisible. Otherwise, yeah, as you see in this cartoon, the manager going through the office saying to people, well, keep up the good work, whatever it is, whoever you are. This is not what we mean by encouraging the heart. It's much more personal, and it's much more personalized. Barbara Fredrickson, on the faculty at the University of North Carolina, she writes that the first core truth about positive emotions is that they open our hearts and they open our minds. They make us more receptive. They make us more creative. You know, when we're feeling good, when we're feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about others, then what happens is that we're willing to listen to them. We're willing to think about what they've had to say. It allows us to be more creative. It allows us to be more imaginative. So here's a third poll for you. What does the ratio of positive to negative affect need to be for people at work to feel fully engaged? So for every criticism, for every constructive criticism, for every advice that you give somebody about, you know, what they need to do to be better, for every time you roll your eyes, you look away, you grimace, what kinds of positive things do you need to say or smile or do to make people feel fully engaged? Is it a one-on-one relationship? Is it one negative to one positive? Is it two positives to one negative? Is it 3 positives to 1? Is it 4 or 5 to 1? The poll's open. Which one of these, Sherry, which one of these are people responding to in terms of the ratio of positive to negative affect?
Well, the votes are still coming in. We'll wait just another moment until a few more people have placed their vote. Okay, they're still coming in. Okay, I'm just going to give it another moment, then I'm going to close the poll. Okay, I'm closing the poll now. And let's have a look here. We can see what the results are. The first one, 1-to-1, 8% of the people answered that. 2-to-1, 3% of the people answered that. 3-to-1, 19% of the people answered that. 4-to-1, 15% of the people answered that. And 5-to-1, 55% of the people answered that. So thanks everybody for your participation on that.
Yes, and thank you. And And clearly some of you hope that it's going to be 5 and 4 to 1, but I'll tell you that the research suggests that it's I was thinking the research suggests it's only 3 to 1, and then I find myself saying only 3 to 1, and then I'll ask you to think about yesterday. How many of you got to the ratio of 3 to 1? How many of you yesterday found yourself finding 3 occasions in which you thanked somebody, in which you smiled at somebody, in which you encouraged somebody, compared to all of the other feedback that you gave to people about, they didn't do what you hoped that they were going to do, that they didn't do it as well as they were going to do, that they could improve in what they want to do. 3 to 1. And I'll tell you, leaders have to be conscious and conscientious in order to be able to achieve this ratio of 3 to 1. And for those of you that are in an interpersonal relationship, let's say outside of the workplace, I'll tell you that the magic ratio is just 5 to 1, and we'll leave it at that. Carissa Rutberg is from Sweden and works as an executive advisor to the CEO of her multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. And she told us in her personal best leadership experience that one of the important things when it came to her personal best was that she publicly praised people. And she said the reason for that was because it's not just about the person that you're recognizing, it's about the audience. It's about making sure that everybody else in the audience knows that you know what good work looks like, that you're on the lookout for that good work, and that this is how you wish everybody would behave. It's about going above and beyond the call of duty for every one of us here in the organization. And what we find empirically is that the more that constituents report that their leaders find ways to celebrate accomplishments of their team, the more they say leaders do that, the more engaged they feel in the workplace. And once again, you see quite clearly, and we've seen consistency throughout this presentation, that when we ask the question, how effective is your leader? Well, we could answer that question simply by saying, well, how frequently does your leader encourage the heart? Because the more the constituents report that their leaders encourage the heart, the higher ratings they give people in terms of the effectiveness, in terms of which they lead the organization. So what can you do to coach people to improve in this ability? Well, you need to understand what motivates each employee, what motivates each individual. You need to ensure that recognition is personalized and that celebrations are genuine. It's not just keep up the good work, whoever you are, whatever it is that you do. You need to make sure that you recognize the individual personally, you personally, and that individual personally. This is something that he or she has done, and you know their name, you know how to say their name, you know what it is that they've done. And thirdly, you need to make sure that we've come full circle here, is that you make sure that you link the rewards and the recognition back with values and vision. And so the reason that we're recognizing Carolyn or Javier or Veronica is because they've helped us to achieve this vision, to move closer toward this ideal, because they've demonstrated this value, and that's why we've recognized them. So these are the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. I've suggested them perhaps in this presentation in a particular order, but my meaning in this slide is to simply tell you it can happen in any order. You can start with challenge, you can start with encourage, you can start with inspire, and in fact, it's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What we find is that when people are at their personal best, they're engaged in all of these practices. Sometimes through challenging, they're also modeling because they're also there, also challenging themselves. Sometimes when they're encouraging the heart, they're doing that in such a way that they're inspiring a shared vision. When they enable others to act, sometimes they're enabling others to act by challenging them to do things, giving them the opportunity to do things that stretch and give them a chance to experiment, and then reward them when they experiment for putting in the time and energy to make things happen and to make those things happen well. And I'm going to stop for a moment and answer some questions. But when I met with Carolyn Wang, I met Carolyn when I was on the faculty at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology as a visiting professor. And Caroline had retired from IBM at the time, but when she was at IBM, she was the highest ranking female in Asia. And Carolyn had been familiar with the Leadership Challenge in this framework for several decades, and she told me that when it comes to leadership, she said it's not about the leader's personality. It's all about how that individual behaves as a leader. And so you and I as coaches want to focus on not on personality. There's no relationship between, for example, the Myers-Briggs type indicator and people's ability to be able to engage in these 5 practices. It's all about behavior. How do we get people to engage in these 5 behaviors? Now, Sherry, hopefully you've been taking some notes about some questions that people have. We've got a few minutes here at the end, and I'd like to see if I could help answer some of those questions.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions, and if we don't get to them all, you can ask your question on our Facebook wall, which is facebook.com/WBECS. You can put your comments and feedback there as well. And the first question actually goes back to the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, which is model, inspire, challenge, enable, and encourage. Can you review a little bit more about the behavior for modeling the way?
Modeling the way, the behaviors there are largely about understanding that you lead by example. And in order to lead by example, you need to figure out, well, what's the example that you want to set? And so in answering that question gets you back to helping people to clarify their values so that they know what's important to them, so that in turn they can spend their time and energy doing the things that are important. You know, when we have to choose between, as constituents, when we have to choose with our leaders between what they say and what they do, we always choose to believe what they do, not what it is that they say.
That is an excellent point. Definitely an excellent point. This is a question that came in earlier about the leadership survey, and what accounts for the difference between the U.S. and Europe and other countries in the leadership survey?
Well, Sherry, that's another good question. I think here's my theory. My theory about the differences is that in some parts of the world, and particularly you saw, you know, higher in Asia and higher in the Middle East and higher in South America, impacts for leadership. And I think what that represents is that as these countries are developing, as their economies are developing, the impact, the differential impact of people who are engaging in these 5 practices is dramatic. There's perhaps more of a binomial distribution in some of these countries. I'll just give you an example. I was in China a few weeks ago, and I found that there was great interest in leadership, because as organizations were beginning to recognize, even large state-run organizations were beginning to recognize, if they're going to get people engaged, they can't order people to be engaged in the workplace. They've got to be able to start behaving in a different sort of way. And as some leaders begin to behave in that different sort of way, it has even a more dramatic impact than it might in the United States, where we may already have thought about some of these issues more and started at an earlier age to train people in these things. For example, the average age in China for people getting an executive MBA or even getting an MBA in China is in their mid-40s. So there's a lot of people who are going back to school to learn about leadership and to learn about, you know, other basic business competencies, which is quite, you know, just a quite different age consideration than would happen, for example, in the United States or in Europe. So these are some of the things that I think might account for the differences by country.
Excellent. And this also relates to the survey results, and it is, if you hire contract employees as opposed to full-time employees, how does this affect your survey results, or was this noted at all?
Yeah, when we take a look at that's just another variation. So I could add an 11th variation, and that is sort of part-time employee or full-time employee. And what we generally found was that variable again did not make a significant difference. Just as it didn't make a difference whether you had worked in the company for 2 months or 2 years or 20 years. What really makes a difference, and this is the point that we keep coming back to, it has to do with the relationship. It has to do with the relationship that the leader has with his or her constituents. And for those of us that are coaching the leader, the manager, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, look, it doesn't make a difference whether your workforce is tall or short, thick or thin, blue or green, contract or non-contract, union or non-union. How you behave makes a difference. And if you want to engage in these 5 practices, you're going to get a workforce that's going to be more engaged, that's going to be more productive. It's going to give you more of their time, their energy, their heart, and they're going to stay longer than if you just abuse them, take them for granted. Don't model the way, don't give them an opportunity to grow and develop, then there's no reason for them to work that hard and no reason for them to stay that long.
Very good.
We probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions, Sherry.
Yes, I have a couple more, and this is a 2-part question. It is, how can you, as a subordinate, challenge the process in an organization? What are the best ways to make leadership everyone's business?
Well, good question. Let me answer that in 2 ways. I mean, I can tell you that a lot of times when I'm doing leadership development programs, someone in the audience will say, I know all this stuff. I only wish my boss were here. And I oftentimes want to remind that person that whether that's true or not, what is true is that they need to figure out how they can be the best leader that they can be for the people that report to them. And so even if our boss isn't doing these kinds of things, that doesn't give us an excuse for somehow not being the kind of leader we can be for our own constituents. When it comes to influencing up in the organization, however, or challenging the process up in the organization, what we need to typically do is we need to do 2 things. One is we need to recognize that it's very unlikely that any of us can get our boss fired. So just don't waste any energy trying to demonstrate to everybody how stupid your boss is, because it just doesn't happen that organizations fire bosses that easily, and we do a whole conversation on that. What's more important is to try to find alignment. If I want to try to change my boss's ideas or anybody else's ideas, I need to really start with where they are. I need to figure out, well, what's important to them, and then I need to kind of pitch my ideas in a way that resonates with their interests, their desires. For example, as the dean of the business school, a general manager here, I'm interested in my organization, but when I make a pitch to my boss, I need to recognize that my boss doesn't just manage the business school, but also has deans of the law school and the engineering school and arts and sciences and other programs. And so if I want to try to influence him to be, to be receptive to my proposal for my division, I need to be able to couch this in terms that allows him to see why this is in the university's best interest to perhaps put these resources into this particular division or this particular program. I've got to work to make him successful, not just myself successful.
Excellent. And the last one is actually a request, not just a question, and it is it permissible to use your data when talking to executives as long as it's attributed to you?
Well, absolutely. Look, I want all of us. Look, if you ask the question, what's my vision? My vision is my purpose. I'm about trying to increase the quality and quantity of leadership in the world. So I would encourage you, I share all this data with you so that if you're trying to coach somebody who says, well, I just don't get why leadership is so important, then I want you to slap them on the side, figuratively, not literally. I want you to, slap the table and say, look, here's the data. Here's why this stuff is going to make a difference. I want you to be able to say here's the point, and it's a way to conclude, Sherry. I want people to understand that great leadership creates great workplaces, and great workplaces in turn create great results. And so what you need to be able to do if you want great results, working backwards, is you need to create a great workplace, and you need to create great leadership. And it doesn't make a difference, it's not about the person, it's about helping that person understand these 5 practices and the behaviors that lead to great workplaces and in turn lead to great results. And if we can do that, then we'll be great coaches because we've made people great leaders. And with that, Sherry, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity today, and all the colleagues who have joined us for this presentation.
Yes, this has been great, and the slides and the recording will be available in the member portal, and as well as the notes, and you can learn more about our wonderful presenter Barry at the webpage wbcs.com/Barry Posner. And thank you everybody for being here. This has been fantastic. I'm going to sign off now, and we have 2 more sessions, or actually 3 more sessions going on today, and we look forward to you participating in those as well. Bye-bye now.